So now let's have a look at the extraocular muscles of the orbit. So the extraocular muscles are going to be the muscles that will enable your eyes to move around and to enable binocular vision, so depth perception, and to make sure that the eyes are aligned with each other. Okay, so you have a muscle on top called the Levator Palpebrae superioris. That one actually pulls up on the upper eyelid, as the name implies. Then you have four muscles that are called recti. This means they're straight. You would have the superior rectus, the inferior rectus, and then you have a medial rectus and a lateral rectus. And in addition to that, you also have two muscles that act obliquely. That would be the superior oblique. Well, we can't really see it very well there. We can see it if I move like this. This is a little bit of the superior oblique after as it's running through a little trochlea, which is a pulley. Click on this here. There you go. That's the pulley. And you can see that the superior oblique actually attaches on the superior aspect of the eyeball here, and it originates from back there. And then we have the inferior oblique, of course, as well, which is going to be right here. There you go. So we're switching over to a slightly more detailed model here, which is really pretty, also courtesy of 3D4Medical. We can see here this is an anterior view of the left eye. We can tell that because right here, this little thing here is actually part of your tear drainage system, so your lacrimal sac. Okay. Actually, when your tears drain, what happens is they get secreted in the superolateral quadrant of your eye. That is where the lacrimal gland is going to be sitting. You can see it's right here. And then the tears will come down from superolaterally. The eyelid will close from superolaterally to inferomedially. So kind of like wiping across here. Rather than this like kind of smushing it down, the eyelid will wipe the film of tears towards the medial angle of the eye, where there are little openings and a little fleshy mound called the lacrimal caruncle, and there are two little canaliculi through which the tears then will drain through these little channels into the lacrimal sac, and from here on downwards and into your nasal cavity, specifically actually, well, through an opening which is in the inferior meatal, inferior meatus, so below the inferior concha of your nasal cavity. And that's one of the reasons why when you are producing more and more tears that you start becoming sniffly, because otherwise the tears would spill out over your face. So, however, let's have a look at a couple details from a slightly different perspective. All right. So I flipped everything around for us here, so we can see lying on top of each other here is your Levator Palpebrae superioris, which is lying on top of the superior rectus. Both of these muscles are going to be innervated by the superior division of the oculomotor nerve. If we then have a look over here, this muscle is called the lateral rectus. So it is a muscle that is straight, hence rectus, and it's on the lateral aspect. So when this muscle contracts, it's going to abduct your eyeball. That means it's going to do that when actually looking in the primary position, which is looking straight forward. Then we also have, if there's a lateral rectus, there's a medial rectus. Oh, I forgot to mention, the lateral rectus is actually innervated by a nerve called the abducent nerve, LR6SO43. No, I haven't lost my mind, but that is a mnemonic. It stands for lateral rectus 6, cranial nerve number 6, abducent nerve. Superior oblique will be over here, innervated by cranial nerve number 4, the trochlear nerve. And it's a trochlear nerve because this muscle actually runs through a trochlea, the little pulley, to then attach to its final destination here on the superior aspect of the eyeball. Then we have the medial rectus, which is also innervated by part of the oculomotor nerve, and inferiorly here is the inferior rectus, also oculomotor nerve. And then we have another oblique, which is the inferior oblique, which is also innervated by the oculomotor nerve. So basically there are three nerves that contribute to the innervation of all of the extraocular muscles. The abducent nerve only does the lateral rectus. The trochlear nerve only does the superior oblique, which runs through a trochlea. And the oculomotor nerve does everything else. That's why the mnemonic LR6 SO4, 3 seems to make a lot of sense for us. What else do we have back here? Well, we have down here the common tendinous ring, also called the annulus of Zinn, depending on who you're talking to. And so you can see that the common tendinous ring, it says right here, it's a little bit of fibrous tissue that surrounds your optic canal. The optic nerve is right here, and it provides an attachment site for the 4 rectus muscles, the superior rectus, the inferior rectus down here, the medial and lateral rectus muscles. Turning over here, we can see the lacrimal gland, and we can see a couple of nerve fibers here. This nerve here is going to be your supraorbital nerve, or actually a part of your supraorbital nerve. It's just the medial branch of it. And here's the supratrochlear nerve. So you can see that the supratrochlear nerve will actually be medial to the supraorbital nerve. And down here is going to be your infraorbital nerve. Okay, so the infraorbital nerve is actually part of V2, so the maxillary division of the trigeminal nerve, and the supraorbital nerve is part of V1, so the ophthalmic division of the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve, of course. Now we might wonder, how can we move the eyeball? Well, technically, we can move the eyeball in 3 different axes: the vertical axis, the transverse axis, and the AP, or anteroposterior axis, as this is a ball and it can rotate fairly freely around those 3 axes. This means if I rotate it into the anatomical position, where now we would have this side medial and this one lateral, the primary position would be with the gaze directed straight forward. Contracting solely the lateral rectus would be leading to abduction of the eyeball. Contracting only the medial rectus would lead to adduction. Contracting only the superior rectus would lead to what we call elevation, and contracting only the inferior rectus will lead to depression. Okay, so far so good. The complicated part comes into play when we think about the actions of the oblique muscles, as their attachment is not just in a straight line, it is actually being redirected, which makes everything a little bit more complicated. So we're just going to briefly touch on the movements that can be elicited by the superior and inferior oblique. So look again here where your superior oblique is, and you can see that the superior oblique actually inserts, after the tendon passes through the trochlea over here, into the sclera, deep to the superior rectus. It is innervated by the trochlear nerve, and if you now imagine that this muscle will pull, it's actually going to be pulling in this direction. So medially, it's as if it's rolling the eyeball towards the midline. Well, that motion is called intorsion. Okay. In addition to that, though, if we move it over like this, it doesn't only do intorsion, it will actually also abduct the eyeball, so abduct the eyeball, and depress the eyeball if we are starting with the gaze forward, that is the primary position. This changes dramatically if the eyeball is already moved into one or the other direction, so either AD or AB ducted. So now let's have a look at the inferior oblique. The inferior oblique is right here. Let's flip everything around, move the eyeball back into the middle. So you can see that the superior oblique will actually come from medially, then attach more laterally here. So the pull direction is towards the medial aspect. If we look from down here, the proximal attachment of the inferior oblique is actually on the floor of the orbit. And then it distally attaches, or actually inserts, into the sclera deep to the lateral rectus muscle. So given its proximal and distal attachments, if this muscle would contract in the primary position, it would make the eyeball roll, that is one of them, or turn, but in the opposite direction than the superior oblique. So that would be described as extorsion, but in addition to that, it also aids in abduction and elevation.